Hello, class. Welcome back. Today for science, we are going to continue. We're actually going to finish our lesson on Unit 8, investigating patterns of the sun, earth, and moon system. Our target for today is I can review Unit 8, including the patterns of the moon. We're going to have a unit exam coming up. So let's go ahead and review the phases of the moon. So let's begin. So some key vocabulary terms. Okay, you got the Earth. Earth is a planet in our solar system that has life on it. Then you have the moon. The moon is a natural satellite that orbits a planet. As you can see the moon here. Then we have the sun, is the star at the center of our solar system and supplies heat and light to Earth. And then gravity is the force that pulls objects towards each other. So some other vocabulary terms we need to know are revolution, which is one orbit of an object, such as a planet or satellite in space around another object. So for example, the sun here, the sun is doing a revolution. The earth is revolving or doing a revolution around the sun. Once the earth does a complete circle around the sun, that is known as a revolution. Now we have the word orbit, the path that one object in space follows as it revolves around another object. Then we have rotation, which is the spinning of a planet, moon, or other object on its axis. Now there is a difference between a revolution and a rotation. Okay, so notice if we look at this picture up here, Earth is rotating while it's revolving around the sun. Okay, rotation means that the planet, like this one here, Earth, is going in its own circle. But here, not only is it going in its own circle, but it's also going around the sun while it's going in circles. And then we have axis, which is an imaginary line about which an object rotates. When we look down here, you look at this line here that they have going across the earth, that is Earth's axis. So why does the moon change? The moon is Earth's only natural satellite, or a celestial body that orbits a planet. It takes the moon about 27.3 days to make a complete orbit around the earth. But because the earth is also moving around the sun at the same time, it takes the moon 29.5 days to go through its 8 different phases. And this is known as a lunar month. So in 29.5 days, the moon goes through its 8 different phases, and we're going to talk about each one. And these are examples of some of the phases up here. Okay, and that is known as a lunar month. Very important. So we have the sun, the moon, and the earth. So here we have the sun, and the sun is flashing its heat and its rays towards the earth. And that is what gives us light, energy, and heat. Okay, so but while it's flashing its light on us, okay, the moon absorbs and reflects some of that light as well. Okay, and that's what we see on Earth. So you see, you got the moon, and the moon also rotates while it revolves around the earth. Okay, and notice how the space in between, as it's going around the earth, that is known as its orbit. So the moon spinning around on its own is known as rotation. The moon going around the earth is known as a revolution. Okay, and the path that the moon uses to go around the earth is known as its orbit. So the moon reflects light. Okay, so this is an example of all of the phases of the moon. Okay, we have the new moon, we have the waxing crescent, we got the first quarter, we got the waxing gibbous, we got the full moon, we have the waning gibbous, we have the third quarter, Then we have the waning crescent, and then we go back to the new moon. So let's go ahead and talk about the phases one by one. We're going to begin with a new moon. A new moon is when the moon cannot be seen because we are looking at the dark side of the moon. The new moon phase occurs when the moon is directly between the earth and the sun. A solar eclipse can only happen at new moons. And this is what a new moon looks like. And this is an example of where the new moon is. Notice how the sun is flashing its light on the moon, but it's this side of the moon, the left side of the moon, the side of the moon that's pointing towards the sun is getting the light. This part of the moon that is facing the earth is not getting any light. That's why it's a little bit darker than here. So when we look at it, when we're looking up at the sky, this is what we see. We see a dark moon, if you see the moon at all. Then you have a waxing crescent. This is an example of a waxing crescent. A waxing crescent moon is when the moon looks like a crescent and the crescent increases or waxes in size from one day to the next. This phase is usually only seen in the west. Waxing, this is an example of a waxing crescent, which is very similar to this. This is an actual picture of the moon showing a waxing crescent. So the sun is, so the moon is reflecting this part of light from the sun. Then this part of the moon here is not receiving any light from the sun. Then we have the first quarter moon. The first quarter moon, or also known as a half moon, is when half of the lit portion of the moon is visible after the waxing crescent phase. It comes a week after the new moon, okay? And it's known as a first quarter. This is an example. Notice how half of the moon is dark, half of the moon is light. This is the part of the moon that is reflecting sunlight. So the sun is over here flashing the light. And then this is the part of the moon that we don't see, or the dark side of the moon. Then we have a waxing gibbous moon. A waxing gibbous moon occurs when more than half of the lit portion of the moon can be seen, and the shape increases or waxes in size from one day to the next. The waxing gibbous phase occurs between the first quarter and full moon phases. Now, this is an example of a waxing gibbous. Notice how most of the moon is lit, except that one little dark part. And then this is an actual example of the moon showing a waxing gibbous. Okay, this part of the moon is not getting any light. And then I know this is a little bit hard, so I got this picture here just to show you as an example. This is the part of the moon that's receiving sunlight. This is the part of the moon that isn't. So then we have a full moon. A full moon is when we can see the entire lit portion of the moon. The full moon phase occurs when the moon is on the opposite side of the earth from the sun, also called opposition. A lunar eclipse can only happen at full moons. Now, this is an example of a full moon. And then this is another example here of a full moon. Notice how when we're looking at the moon, the whole thing is lit. Then we have a waning gibbous. A waning gibbous moon occurs when more than half of the lit portion of the moon can be seen, and the shape decreases or wanes in size from one day to the next. The waning gibbous phase occurs between the full moon and third quarter phase. This is an example of a waning gibbous. And then this is an example of the actual moon demonstrating a waning gibbous. Okay, so notice this is the part that's receiving sunlight from the earth, from the sun. This part is not receiving any light. Oh, then we Then we have the last quarter moon. Well, Mr. Perez needs to fix this. Oops. Sorry, guys. Sorry, everybody, for the technical difficulties. Back to where we were. The last quarter moon. The last quarter moon, or a half moon, is when half of the lit portion of the moon is visible after the waning gibbous phase, also known as a third quarter. Okay, now this is an example of a last quarter moon or a third quarter. And notice how when we're looking at it, half of the moon is lit and the other half is darkened. Okay. But yeah. And then we have the waning crescent. A waning crescent moon is when the moon looks like a crescent and the crescent decreases or wanes in size from one day to the next. And this is an example of a waning crescent. And then this is two examples of the moon showing a waning crescent. This is what we normally see. Well, this is what you would actually see. But then this is just a nice, prettier version of what a waning crescent would look like. Okay, and now the moon also has an effect on the frequency of tides, okay? Most coastal areas experience 2 high tides and 2 low tides each day. High tide and low tide are about 6 hours apart. Tides are the rise and fall of sea levels caused by the combined effects of gravitational forces exerted by the moon, the sun, and the rotation of the earth. So when we're looking at this picture here, if we look over here, notice how these waves are crashing very close to the shoreline or the rocks, okay? That is high tide because the water is very high up against the shore, okay? Now, if we look at this picture here, notice how we have these waves over here. If these waves were only coming up to about where these poles are, that would be low tide because that would mean that the water level is low on the shore, okay? And we have 2 high tides a day and 2 low tides a day, and they happen every 6 hours. Okay, guys, so what I'd like you to do now is go ahead and take the review quiz and try your best on it, okay? And I will see you guys tomorrow.